Greetings, fellow Hyperboreans. Dave here, the developer of the Hyperborea system for Foundry VTT, bringing you another video. Today we're going to do something a little bit different though. I have actually developed two, and a third one on the way, but two that we're going to talk about today, two modules for Foundry that I initially designed to work with Hyperborea, but I then opened it up and just realized it was trivially easy to do this. So really they'll work with any game system. So I'm going to show you in the context of my Hyperborea test environment, but realize you could use this with Pathfinder, Old School Essentials, Worlds Without Number, Adventure or Conquer a King system. D&D 5e has a weird little issue, so you could use it with D&D 5e, but it's only partially compatible. I probably won't go too much into that. It's in the documentation, in the README, it kind of explains it a little bit. But you know, just about any system out there, you can make it work with just a little bit of configuration, and it really is a little bit. I'll show you how that works in this video today. So what are these two modules that I've developed? Well, they're just a pair of character development modules. So they're primarily player tools, player-facing tools. One of them is what I call the Character Personality Oracle. The other one is the Character Backstory Generator. Now, both of these use OpenAI, aka ChatGPT, to work for their functionality. And again, we'll talk about this in a little more detail as we dig into the tools. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how to install them. Probably most people watching this will already know how to install a module, but I'll just show you where they can be found very easily. So I actually need to back out to my setup to install the modules. This is my Foundry version 12 environment, and then my Foundry version 13 is pre-configured, so I'll be switching to that in a little bit. But if we go to add-on modules, and I'm just going to click install module, these are both available in the catalog. So if I look for the Character Oracle, there it is right there, Thurian Knight, that's me. So I'm going to go ahead and click install, and then I'm going to do the other one as well since we're here. So I'm going to look for backstory. There we go, Character Backstory Generator. Again, that's mine. So we'll just install that one as well. And now they're both in there. So easy peasy. You know, and it's that easy. So they're there. And you can see now there's my Backstory Generator, my Personality Oracle. They're both at the same release level. Just released last week. So, and I just pushed out a couple of enhancements yesterday, which is why they're at 1.0.2. So anyway, so we've got them installed now. Very easy, as is pretty much any module in Foundry to install. So let's talk about what these modules are a little bit. So the Character Personality Oracle, what it does is initially it simulates a 4-card tarot draw. So a standard 78-card tarot deck. The module, when you use it, it will simulate drawing 4 random cards from that deck. It does include reversals. Now, I'm not a tarot guy. I know nothing about it, but I understand that cards can be reversed, whatever that means. I'm not sure if that means it was drawn upside down or what, but it is a thing in tarot. So it does include reversals. And then it takes those cards, and this is all done within the module, and there's no graphics. It just sort of does it in the background. Then it actually takes some of your character, what I might call demographic data. So it's like, you know, your age, your ancestry, your class, your gender or sex. It feeds that all to OpenAI, and OpenAI, ChatGPT, then does a tarot reading of those cards, not to generate a fortune, but instead it generates a sort of a personality profile. And it sends that data back in like 3 or 4 short paragraphs, which can then be optionally fed right into the biography field on your character sheet. So, and then the backstory generator works in a similar way. So that also, again, it's a player-facing tool. These are both buttons on the character sheet. We'll see these in just a second. But again, it takes some of that information from the character sheet, the demographic data, if you will, and sends it to ChatGPT and asks it to generate a backstory, and you can feed it some additional information. So let's actually just go ahead and dig into this a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. It'll make more sense that way. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my Hyperborea 3rd edition dev environment here. Let's do this. Okay, so here we are, and I'm going to go in here. Of course, the first thing I have to do is enable the modules. So Character Personality module and Backstory Generator, we save those. Yes, it wants to refresh, no big deal. So we'll go ahead and let it reload. And now I can go back into settings here. First of all, I should point out, when these are initially installed, when the world loads, you're going to get these nice little help messages in your chat. So there's the personality oracle, there's the backstory generator. This is actually very useful. It's not just an advertisement. It actually tells you how to do the basic configuration and then how to use it. And this will appear for both GMs and players. I should say the configuration section only appears for the GMs. The usage appears for everyone, okay? And same for the personality oracle. Again, the configuration section only appears for GMs, but everybody gets the usage section here. And you can disable these in the configuration. So before we do that though, what I want to do is I want to show the system configurations link that's in both of these. This actually takes you to my GitHub because once we get in here, I have pre-configured a number of different game systems. These are ones that I personally have tested and I know that they work. And essentially you can set up, you'll see how these fields are set up, but basically like in Axe, gender and race don't have their own fields on the character sheet for Axe, but you can get in the age and the class, and you might be able to pull this somewhere else from a different character field if you're using it. Otherwise, the players can fill it in manually. And then the biography is where the output from ChatGPT or OpenAI gets fed back into in the character sheet. So Hyperborea, like I said earlier, I originally developed both of these for Hyperborea, and all of these fields exist on the character sheet for Hyperborea. So it was super easy. Then I started looking at other systems and realized, okay, you know, Axe, well, it's got a couple of the fields and the other ones can be manually filled in. OSE, similar situation. It's got class sort of has ancestry if you're an elf or a hobbit, but otherwise, you know, you've got some of this information. Again, it can be manually filled in. Pathfinder 2e does have all of the fields that you would want for it. Worlds Without Number has a couple of them. D&D 5e, I guess I'll talk a little bit about it since we're looking at this file anyway. Essentially, the problem is that the module wants to put a button on the character sheet to use it, to execute the module. D&D 5e has something, I'm not even sure what it is because I haven't dug into the code of the D&D 5e system, but there's something about the character sheet where it will not load that button. So you can still run the tool from the configuration. You just can't run it from your character sheet. Therefore, you can't feed the information directly into your biography field on your character sheet either. You'd have to manually copy and paste it. So that's that. But otherwise, all these other systems work great. Contributing, you know, if you have a system that you want to test, by all means, go ahead and test it and send me the info, or you can ask me to test it myself, and I would be happy to do that and see if I can figure out how to make it work with that system. So feel free to submit a GitHub issue for that. And this system configurations file is essentially the same for both of these modules. I just did the one for the backstory generator, and I'll just click the personality oracle real quick here. But you know, it's pretty much the same thing. You've got these systems that I personally have tested and some notes about contributing. So no big deal there. So that, you know, you could just you can follow those links if you're not using Hyperborea, or if you want to branch out and try a different system, you can check and see if it's listed in there. And like I said, if you want, you can even request me to do that. So that's those are the welcome messages there. Teaches you a little bit about it. Now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go in and look at the settings here. So we'll hit the configure settings. You can see I've got my two modules right here. So I'll hit backstory generator first. And it comes pre-configured for Hyperborea. You know, like I said, I developed it for Hyperborea initially, and I just left the basic config in there because it doesn't hurt anybody. And anybody who's using some other system can just change these fields easily enough. But starting at the very top, you can actually initially test your connection to OpenAI, although you do have to have your API key in place first, otherwise it's not going to do you any good. So your API key, as far as I know, they pretty much always start with SK hyphen and then a whole bunch of additional characters, which is why I sort of put that in there as an example or a hint. But you need to, like I said, set up an API key with OpenAI. Now those are free to set up. And I believe OpenAI gives you like a $5 credit when you first get started. I did this 2 years ago, so I have used my credit up. But I believe they are still offering that $5 credit to get started with a free API key. And these are super cheap. Like I used my $5 up, but I did that a year ago when I was doing some hardcore development with OpenAI. It had nothing to do with Foundry or something else entirely. So, but if you get started with this, set yourself up a key, and then you can just paste it in here. You can tell it which model you want to use. I've been using 3.5 turbo. It's fast, it's cheap. Like I said, now to give you an example, if I were to look at my usage, I'm at like 3 pennies, 3 cents. And I think I've run probably a couple of hundred tests between the 3 modules that I'm working on. Because remember, I also mentioned I was doing a 3rd module that's not out yet, but these 2 are. So we can talk about these 2 for this video. So you can select which OpenAI model. I may even add more to this. These were just the 4 that I thought were the most likely to be useful to people. And like I said, 3.5 turbo is your cheapest, and it works really well for me. So I've just been sticking with that one. Here's the welcome message thing. You can toggle this on and off, so I can turn that off, and now I won't see it anymore after this. Otherwise, if I leave that checked, it's going to pop up every time I load my world into the chat there, which is fine. There's obviously nothing wrong with that. But if your players, let's say you're starting up a new campaign and your players are using these tools, but now they've created their characters and they're done, they don't need that welcome message anymore, go ahead and turn it off. No big deal. Okay, so then you've got these character paths. Of course, these are the data paths, and like I said, the system configurations file has a number of preset ones, and you can also make up your own if you want. Then there's this genre preset. So there's a number of options here. If you select custom, you're not going to put anything in here then. However, the players will be prompted to fill something in, and it's optional. They don't have to fill something in, but they will be prompted to fill something in when they're using the module. Otherwise, like I leave it on Sword and Sorcery for the Hyperborea world. If you're playing, Pathfinder, you might be running high fantasy. That's pretty common for Pathfinder. Or you might be running a grimdark campaign of something else. Maybe you're even running a specific module that is grimdark even within a Pathfinder or a D&D or whatever system. So you can check that, and this is used to sort of tell OpenAI how to flavor the response. And finally, some world and region lore, again optional, but you can fill in like this. And this is not I filled this in previously, so that's actually not what comes by default with a fresh install. Fresh install, this should actually be an empty field, but you can fill in and tell it about your game, or your world, I should say. If you're doing a homebrew world, you might want to say this is a weird science fantasy world with high technology and high magic. Or if you're doing a known campaign world that's published, sometimes OpenAI actually knows about that world, like it knows about Hyperborea. So I can just tell it right here, and it actually has knowledge of the Hyperborea 3rd edition role-playing game. And so that is enough to feed it some context. So you've got all this information in. Like I said, you do have to feed in your OpenAPI key, and then you're good to go. And on the personality oracle, it works very similar. Again, you have to fill in your OpenAPI key. You can do a test right here if you want. Not necessary, but it's there to let you test it. Again, you can select your OpenAI model. You've got the exact same fields as were in the backstory, and there's not anything about genre here. You can actually fill that in. There's a possibility to give some additional context when you're doing the tool using the module as a player. So I'm just going ahead and close this out, and I'm actually going to switch to my other environment, because like I said, this is Foundry V12, and I didn't have the modules installed, so they're not configured. But if I flip to my other environment, here's Foundry Virtual 13, and I've got everything configured and ready to go. I'm not going to open up the config because my OpenAPI key is there. And unfortunately, I could not figure out a way. I will admit I didn't dig into it very deeply, but I didn't see a way to obfuscate that key as part of the display in the configuration settings. You know how sometimes you get a password field and it replaces everything with asterisks or dots? I was hoping I could do that. There may be a way to do that in Foundry, I'm not sure. So anyway, I'm not going to show off my configuration settings here because my API key is there. But to use the system, or the module I should say, is actually quite simple. So we're just going to go ahead and open up my Argyros character here, and you can see Character Oracle and Backstory. Those are the buttons that I was talking about Like I said, in D&D 5e, for whatever reason, these buttons don't appear on the character sheet. There's something going on, and I haven't been able to dig into it. Haven't had the time. I've been working on these, doing some other stuff. But Pathfinder 2e, Axe, OSE, Worlds Without Number, they all work perfectly. These buttons appear as they should. And what happens is, like I said, it pulls in some of your information. So it'll pull in your class, it'll pull in your race. If I go to the description tab, it'll pull in your gender or your sex, it'll pull in your age, and then it can fill in the biography field, which is right here on the character sheet. So when I click Character Oracle, you can see it pulled in this information for me automatically. This is where the data fields mappings come in when you're looking at the configurations in the system config. If you have the mapping right, it's going to pull in whatever information you had filled in, like my race or ancestry is Atlantean, right as it is in this drop-down list right here. Gender, male, pulled it right in, etc. So, it just pulls those in automatically. And if your character system, I'm sorry, not your character, your game system doesn't support or have fields for these items, they'll just come in as blank, and you can just fill them in. So if you're playing OSE, it might pull in your name and your class, and that might be all you get. But if you're a male or female, you know what your character's age is, or you can make it up on the spot. You know if your character is a human or an elf or whatever. So you can just fill these in manually, and it's no big deal. Okay? And then you've got this tone or theme, which is considered optional. I've got some suggested options. This is for the Character Oracle. What this is intended to do is give OpenAI sort of a hint of what you have in mind as the player for your character's personality. You don't have to give them much, just a few words. Grim and stoic might be all you want to feed it, or cheerful and naive, or whatever you want to do. Again, it's optional. You can feed it nothing if you want. But you can fill in something here. And then if you check this save result to biography, it will automatically post it right into here in your biography section of your character sheet. Now you can see I've got it right here, so I did a test one already. So when I click Speak the Oracle, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to check this save result box, but if I click Speak the Oracle, you can see it's querying the Oracle. It's basically sending this data to OpenAI, and this is what I got back. Thus saith the Oracle. And like I said, it's a tarot reading, so it's 4 cards, and it tells you what the 4 cards were that it drew, and it goes to your core self, your emotional self, your shadow self, and your path forward. Again, I know nothing about tarot. I just thought it was kind of a cool concept. And I actually got the idea from Cyberpunk 2077, if you've ever played that before. There's a character in there that will do a tarot reading for you, and it's kind of fun. Anyways, I borrowed the idea from there, and I just thought it was a neat concept. And so it does this reading, and usually it tells you exactly, like here it says reversed Ace of Swords. So that's what was drawn for the core self, and then OpenAI is interpreting that for you. So this here is what would be fed in under Thus saith the Oracle. So this was the one that I did previously, and I have no idea if they're the same. Well, obviously they're not the same, because you're not going to get the same cards drawn. But that's what you get. And if I do the backstory, I get something like this, the story so far. So if I click backstory, once again, it pulls in all these fields automatically. You've again got a tone or a theme. Again, this is designed to sort of guide the character's, as you can see, personality, voice, emotional outlook. It just essentially influences how the backstory is written by OpenAI. This world or regional context, this is what the GM fills in the system configuration or the module configuration. So you may have seen this text in there. That's exactly it. But a player can also add to this. They can override it, whatever they want. This is editable by each player as they're using the module. And you can see it explains what it's done. It provides a shared setting reference for all generated backstories, etc., etc. Here's your genre. You remember I said you could select custom, or you could have it as sword and sorcery. If the GM selects any one of these in the configuration, it's going to be read-only, so it's going to be locked into that option. But since as the GM I had selected custom, now as a player, I get this custom genre description, so I can tell it what I want here. Now maybe I just do sword and sorcery, which was one of the options, but I can do whatever I want here. This field is not displayed when one of these other things is selected. Okay, because then it's locked in there. So as the GM, you can decide if you want to lock them into a specific genre that fits your world, your play setting, which personally I would. If I was the GM, I would absolutely lock it in, because it's not like it's going to override much in terms of what the player wants to do, but it's going to, again, help OpenAI to flavor the backstory or the character profile or whatever that's being generated. So we've got that. I can fill in something here as the player if custom was selected. Once again, I can save the result to my biography. Yes or no. Right now I'm going to say no because I've already got one there. But I'm going to hit generate backstory. Once again, we're querying OpenAI in the background. And there it is. We get the story so far. So once again, that's what I've got here, that I tested this on July 7th, today being July 8th. So I just ran this yesterday. And again, you get this very brief, and that's all I wanted, right? That my intention was to create a short backstory. It may, now realize, because this is pretty random, OpenAI is going to try and draw from things about where you're from, like Atlantis. My character is an Atlantean, right? So OpenAI says, oh, he's Atlantis, or he's from Atlantis. So I'm going to talk about when Atlantis fell into ruin. Well, that doesn't really fit the world of Hyperborea. So, you don't always get something super relevant to your world. The more context you can feed OpenAI, the more relevant your results are going to be. But the players can also just take this and use it as a jumping off point for their own inspiration. Maybe they just get a couple of key ideas out of here that they think are cool, and then they write their own backstory that's not this. It's not just a custom cut and paste of this text, but at least they got a couple of neat ideas from ChatGPT on where they might go with their backstory. Same thing you could do with your character personality oracle. You can let it paste it right in like this, or a player could read this and just use this as inspiration to describe their character's personality in a few words or a couple of sentences, and basically ignore the oracle entirely, except as inspiration. So you can use it however you want. That's why I made the writing it to the biography an optional checkbox, because by default, people may just want to read it and then, like I said, riff off that to come up with their own backstory or their own personality description or whatever they want to do. So, and that's how both of those modules work. They're very similar, as you can tell. I had actually considered merging them into a single module, and then I thought, well, some players are going to have an idea for their backstory, but they just haven't figured out what their personality is yet. So they're going to really just want that oracle, but they don't care about the backstory generator. They've got their own. Other players are going to be like, well, I know what my character's personality is like, but I don't have any ideas for a backstory. So, I just figured, okay, I'm just going to leave these as separate tools. As the GM, you can install one or both as you see fit, or none if you don't want to use it. And players can then use them as they see fit. And they can choose if they want to use one or both, or none, whatever the player wants to do for their character. Let's see, I think that is really about it. These are pretty straightforward modules. The third one I've got coming, incidentally, is an encounter enhancer. And I don't really think I'm set up to demonstrate that right now, but basically if you have some random encounter tables set up in your system, in your Hyperborea system, this module will monitor for encounters being thrown into the chat bar, and it will then, again, it puts a button in the chat that you can then send to OpenAI and get kind of an interesting description for that encounter back. I'll do a separate demo video on that later. Like I said, I'm still putting the finishing touches on that module, but it's coming soon. All right, gang. Fellow adventurers and Hyperboreans, this is Dave, signing off. Happy adventuring.